I'm sitting back against the chair, one hand holding a warm cup of tea, the other flipping through an old magazine I picked up from the thrift shop down the street. The early November air slips through the cracks of my tiny apartment on the edge of Boulder, Colorado. Outside the window, the leaden gray sky presses down threatening snow, but offering only a thick, suffocating silence. The phone rings slicing through the quiet. I glance at the screen, Dad. My breath catches automatically. I hit the speaker button, not daring to hope for anything good. Claire, you don't need to come home for Thanksgiving this year. Richard Dawson says, his voice light, almost casual, like he's asking someone to pick up more milk on the way home. For a second, I think I misheard, I'm sorry, what? We just think it's better if... He trails off like reading from a script. You stayed put to keep things peaceful. I set my teacup down hard on the table. The sound of ceramic against wood sharp and final. Lila, of course, again. Lila, the fragile princess of the family, the one who never carried a consequence heavier than her own breath. Every time there's a problem, the world freezes in place so Lila can breathe easier. So what you're saying, I say, carefully enunciating each word as my throat tightens, is that I'm not invited because Lila gets tense. He sighs that familiar weary sigh, the one that always meant, don't make this a big deal, Claire. It's just one day, he says, you'll be fine. I shoot up from the chair, wood creaking under the sudden movement. Just one day. My voice slices through the room, colder than the frost already creeping along the porch outside. You say that after I've sent over $4,800 since January, just to keep the house warm. The line hums with empty static. He doesn't respond immediately. Don't bring money into this, he says finally, his voice flustered. You offered to help. A dry, hollow laugh escapes me, echoing in the empty walls of my apartment. Offered. In January, when the heating bill spiked and you called at midnight, crying that the furnace died, who paid it? Me, in March when Mom sobbed because the repairman said it was beyond fixing. Who found another one, me again, and when Lila burned through her savings on that ridiculous podcast idea, and there wasn't money left for fall heating oil, still me. My voice is calm, but my hands are trembling. And before all that, before the furnace, before the desperate calls, I gave up something they never even thanked me for, a full-ride MBA scholarship at the University of Washington, back when Lila's first entrepreneurial dream collapsed some badly thought-out Etsy shop that left her crying in debt. I stayed behind in Colorado instead of moving to Seattle. Stayed to help the family, to be close in case of emergencies. I thought love meant sacrifice. Turns out to them, it just meant availability. Richard doesn't argue with any of it. He just falls back on the same exhausted script. Family is family, Claire. But this time, he adds, almost pleading, almost defensive, Lila's been through a lot. She needs calm. I stare through the fogged glass. Outside, tiny flakes are beginning to fall, dusting the walkways like an early funeral. I've been through a lot, too. I just never got to be the fragile one. His voice shifts again, trying for smoothness but cracking at the edges. Don't make this awkward. It's not personal. I grip the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles blanch white. Then don't expect another dime from me this winter. I say, my voice low and dangerous. If I'm not part of the family when it's convenient, don't treat me like an ATM when it's cold. Before he can respond, I end the call. The screen goes black, and so does my heart. Outside, the snow keeps falling soft, cold, relentless. Inside, the silence is heavier than any storm. I sink onto the edge of my bed, my hands clasped together. My thoughts, a snarled knot like the old cord stuffed in the kitchen drawer. I have been. The duct tape holding the Dawson family together for years. Maybe it's time I finally let it all fall apart. The short phone call replays in my mind like a broken tape. They really did it. Excluded me from Thanksgiving as casually as canceling a dentist appointment. I glance up at the small photo frame on the dusty shelf. Me, Mom, and Dad at Thanksgiving in 2019. Back when I had just started my first job at the freight company, low pay, exhausting shifts. But even then, I caught a midnight Greyhound from Boulder to Denver just to sit at the table, eat Mom's overcooked roast chicken, and listen to Dad rant about the Broncos losing again. That warmth feels distant now, like an old movie reel gone dim and brittle. I get up, walk to the tiny desk wedged by the window, and open my battered laptop. The wind howls outside, slipping past the window frame with a sharp, bitter sting. I log into the utility payment portal, the one I created last winter, after Mom called sobbing that they couldn't afford heating oil anymore. I had been the one making monthly payments, the one calling the oil company every time the tank ran low, the one moving money around at midnight to make sure they didn't freeze through those brutal Colorado nights. Over $2,400 last year, $4,800 this year, all for heating, all from a job that barely covered my own rent. And I didn't do it because they begged. I did it because I thought that's what family meant, stepping in when it was hard. But now I see it clearer. Helping family had conditions after all. Loyalty was a one-way street, and somewhere along the way, I became the spare tire. They didn't even bother to check anymore. I pull up the Excel file where I quietly logged every transfer. The last entry reads 10 months ago, $400, sent ahead of the cold so they wouldn't worry. I lean back in my chair, staring at the numbers, the dates, the silent record of years spent sacrificing invisibly. A ping from my inbox pulls me back. An automated alert. Suspicious activity credit account in your name. My heart thuds, once slow and heavy. I click through, buried among the monthly utility payments. The alert shows a credit card opened 2 years ago. My name, my social security number, thousands in charges, months of missed payments. I never opened it, but I knew who did. Somewhere between freezing winters and saving Lila's collapsing candle empire, my father had decided my name was just another resource to spend. No phone call, no permission, just entitlement written in invisible ink over every dollar I'd ever sent. The betrayal is cold, surgical, almost clinical. It doesn't surprise me. It doesn't even hurt the way it once would have. It just confirms what I already knew. I had never been a daughter to them. I had been a solution. I closed the email without replying to the fraud department. Not yet. First, something else. I return to the utility account. The cursor blinks over the Cancel Automatic Payments button. Just one click, one heartbeat. I sit for a long time, not because I'm hesitating, but because I'm letting myself remember. Remember what it felt like when love wasn't a transaction. When I still thought doing more would earn me a seat at the table. And then without ceremony, I click. A confirmation flashes. Service will end November 2nd, 4 weeks before Thanksgiving. I close the laptop and walk to the window. The snow has started falling, thick, silent flakes layering the sidewalks and rooftops in hush and surrender. Each flake is lighter than a breath, each one a memory, each one a missed thank you, each one a dismissal disguised as duty. They'll notice, but not immediately. Lila will keep believing the world bends to her. Comfort, Mom will try to ignore it the way she always does. Until the cold wraps her fingers stiff while cooking dinner. And Dad will get angry, of course, because in his world, love and money were always synonyms. And now he's lost both. Part of me feels hollow, like something final just slipped away, like stepping off a train. You always thought you'd be on forever, but another part, the part that stopped believing apologies mean anything. The third time I skip my own coat to pay their bills, feels light. For the first time in my adult life, I am not freezing for someone else's comfort. I know this winter will be long. I know guilt will knock at my door, some nights dressed in familiar faces. But when it comes, I'll let it stand out in the cold. Because I am finally home, and home is not where they are anymore. I started waking up earlier, not because my job changed. No, the early shifts at the warehouse stayed the same. But because sleep hasn't felt peaceful since that call, since the moment Richard Dawson, my father, told me to stay put for Thanksgiving. In the days after canceling their heating service, I carried a constant tension in my chest. Like walking a tightrope stretched over a canyon, part relief, part doubt, and a whole lot of cold wind whistling through the emptiness. But every morning when I swung my legs over the bed and felt the icy floor beneath my bare feet, I remembered why I did it. Not for revenge, not for bitterness, but because surviving on scraps of affection wasn't living. It was slow death. On November 2nd, the system officially sent confirmation. The heating oil service for the house at 100U Willow Creek Drive had been canceled. I read the email while sipping my morning coffee in the kitchen, the little space heater humming steadily by my feet. A quiet, steady comfort. I bought for myself piece by piece, over time, shift by overtime shift. That day, the snow fell unusually thick. Boulder was already cold in early November, but this year, winter arrived like an ambush. I thought of the old two-story house with its thin windows, drafty corners, and decaying furnace that had gasped through too many winters already. I didn't feel happy imagining them bundling up in winter coats inside their own home, but I didn't feel guilty either. Kindness had been treated like a given for too long. Maybe it was time they learned it wasn't infinite. 4 days later, the first message came. From Mom, Susan Dawson. Sweet rehearsed desperate. Claire, the heating system seems to be acting up. Could you check it for me? I stared at the text until the screen dimmed and went black. Then I placed the phone face down without replying. That evening, another ping. Lila, no greeting, no context, just judgment packed into one careless sentence. Nice to see where your priorities are. I rolled my eyes, muted the conversation thread, and set the phone aside again. Lila, who had burned through $16,000 of my parents' savings, trying to start a luxury candle brand, and then posted $7 lattes and Zara hauls like she was a self-made success. On the 7th day Richard called, I let it ring until it died into silence. 3 minutes later, the voicemail came through. Claire, I don't know what's going on. The house is down to 58 degrees. If you know anything, call me. His voice was hoarse, frustrated, a mix of anger and helplessness he wasn't used to feeling. Not when he always had me to patch the roof, pay the bills, cover the cracks. I didn't listen to the voicemail. Instead, I grabbed my coat, walked to Aspen Brew Cafe in town, and lost myself for hours among the crackling warmth, cinnamon waffles, and the hum of strangers' soft conversations. For the first time in years, I let myself enjoy an afternoon without looking over my shoulder for another emergency that wasn't mine to fix. On the 10th day, a call came from an unknown number, the heating oil provider. Hi, is this Miss Claire Dawson? Are you planning to renew service for the house at Willow Creek? We haven't heard back from the homeowners, and the contract was under your name. I answered calmly, No, the contract was canceled. I am no longer responsible for that house. A pause. Just to confirm you're not intending to continue payments. I glanced out the window where snow piled in lazy heaps against the sidewalk. That's correct. Simple final, the way cutting a fraying cord should feel. Starting November 14th, the messages picked up speed. First, Mom. Claire, it's only 50 degrees. Your dad refuses to wear a heavy coat. Lila's been coughing all day. Can you please call me? Then Dad, this isn't about money anymore. This is family. Then Lila, with all the grace of a child throwing a tantrum. Fine, just pretend you were never part of this family. I didn't delete the messages. I didn't reply either. I simply saved them as a quiet, meticulous record of everything I once poured into a void and everything I got in return. On the 16th day, Boulder was slammed by a brutal snowstorm. News stations screamed warnings. Stay inside, brace for outages. I curled up by my small heater wrapped in a thick knitted blanket, a mug of hot cocoa warming my hands. Outside, the world howled with snow and cold and bitter winds. Part of me wondered briefly if they were huddled together at Willow Creek, bundled in every blanket they owned, desperately trying to stay warm, maybe thinking about me. Not as the human ATM, not as the afterthought, but as the person who had kept them alive for 2 winters without asking for anything in return. But I didn't wait for those thoughts to finish. I pulled the armchair closer to the heater and cracked open my new novel. The first line made me smile. You can't warm a place where they always saw you as the cold wind. Since the heating was cut, the messages increased with every drop of the thermometer. I didn't need to check my phone to know the script. Urgency. Blame, desperation, never gratitude, never reflection. On November 17th, another text from Mom. Claire, it's down to 54 degrees. Your dad's coughing worse. Can you help call someone? I placed the phone face down on the kitchen counter. The smell of potato and celery soup filled the room, fogging the windows. A different kind of warmth, a life built by my own hands. That afternoon, temperatures plunged to 25 degrees. Snow lashed against rooftops like fists. But my little apartment stayed warm, peaceful, steady. I wrapped myself tighter in my old favorite sweater, turned the oven on low, and poured cinnamon tea into my favorite chipped mug. Outside, a world frozen in chaos. Inside, a life no longer ruled by guilt. November 19th, Dad called 12 times. 12. I didn't pick up once. A message came through short and commanding. "Call me back. This isn't a joke." I gave a dry laugh. To them, I would always be the responsible one. The fixer. The silent, dependable backup. They forgot that even kindness has its limits. Forgot that even the strongest bridges burn when walked over too many times. That same day, Lila posted a story on Instagram, a picture of her feet wrapped in fuzzy socks captioned, "Cold enough to feel like we live in a freezer." I scrolled past without pausing. No pity, no anger. Just a strange, detached satisfaction. The reality they built was finally the one they had to live in. On November 21st, Mom's voice cracked through a voicemail. "Claire, it's down to 40 degrees. Your dad's sleeping in a winter coat. My hands are numb. I can't even do the dishes. Can you help us?" I stirred the grilled cheese on the pan until it was golden and crisp. The oven warmed the apartment with a soft glow, the hum of survival, the murmur of self-respect. The phone buzzed again and again. Each vibration was a small ghost I refused to resurrect. On November 23rd, 2 days before Thanksgiving, a message from Dad sliced through the noise. "Claire, if you still consider yourself part of this family, now's the time to prove it." I stood in the kitchen, chopping onions for a simple stew, the blade steady in my hand. Outside, snow blanketed the porch, and the neighbors' cars in thick, unbroken white. Inside, the kettle whistled softly, steam curling into the cold morning air. I closed my eyes and let the memories drift across my mind. Lila telling me I was useless when I refused to bankroll her magazine. Dad calling me oversensitive when I asked why I was always excluded. Mom saying nothing over and over and over to keep the fragile peace. I had been silent long enough. I had been available long enough. I had given enough. That night I curled up on the sofa, my book resting on my knees, the light fleece blanket tucked around me. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp, but it was enough. Warm, safe mine. The phone kept ringing, vibrating across the counter. But I didn't move, because sometimes the only way for people to recognize your worth is for you to disappear from the places they always assumed you'd stay. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke before sunrise, the pale light slipping through the thin white curtains like a ghost. Outside, Boulder had been swallowed whole by winter's quiet hand. Snow blanketed the steps and rooftops, thick and untouched. No cars, no voices, just the endless whisper of the wind sliding over the frozen city. It wasn't loneliness that filled the air. It was peace, hard-earned, long overdue peace. I turned on the coffee maker and moved slowly through the little kitchen, the warmth of the heater at my feet making the chill bearable. Breakfast was simple: a slice of crispy toast, a smear of peanut butter, a juicy orange. No turkey, no mashed potatoes, no casseroles baked with memories from an old kitchen I no longer belonged to. Not because I couldn't recreate them, because I no longer needed to. This year, there was no point dressing the table for people who never noticed when I was missing. This year, I chose simplicity, not from lack, but from freedom. By 10 a.m., I was curled on the sofa, a thick blanket draped over me, a mug of coffee warming my hands. A documentary flickered quietly on the TV, the gentle hum of narrative soothing the sharp edges of the last few weeks. For the first time in what felt like years, my chest wasn't tight. I almost forgot the emotional wreckage left behind, until the doorbell rang, sharp, insistent, uninvited. Before I even moved, I knew who it was. I walked slowly to the door, each step deliberate, each breath steady. Peeking through the peephole, I wasn't surprised to see him, Richard Dawson, my father, standing there in a thick gray coat, his cheeks flushed from cold, and something more: frustration, expectation, entitlement. His breath curled in pale clouds around him, his posture stiff, proud, defensive. Not apology, expectation. I cracked the door open just slightly, letting a stream of warm air wash over his weathered face. "Claire," he said, his voice brittle against the cold, "we need to talk." I leaned casually against the doorframe, hand still on the knob. "I don't think today's the right day for that," I said coolly. He pressed forward anyway, as if proximity alone could force obligation. "You cut the heat," he accused flatly. "The house is freezing, your mom's sick. Lila's locked herself upstairs, it's 38 degrees inside." I kept my gaze steady on his. "I didn't cut anything. I said I just stopped paying. There's a difference." He frowned, a line deepening across his forehead. "You know we're not good with tech. The contract was under your name. When you canceled, the company didn't notify us." I raised an eyebrow. "Because it was never in your name to begin with." I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "I handled everything for 2 years, over $8,000. I paused, letting the number hang between us like frost in the air. "And then, with one call, I was cut out of Thanksgiving to avoid upsetting Lila, so maybe now you should handle the rest." He flinched as if he hadn't expected me to remember every penny, every sacrifice. But I did. Every skipped lunch break to wire emergency payments. Every icy morning standing at the bus stop because I couldn't afford car repairs. Every night lying awake wondering if I was ever enough. "Claire," he said, trying to soften his tone, "don't make this more complicated than it is. It's just been a tough year. Lila's been through a lot." I almost laughed. The same excuse recycled like a worn-out apology. "Lila's been through a lot because she puts herself there," I said, my voice sharper now. "I stayed quiet when she blew through her savings on that creative academy she dropped out of. After 2 months, I stayed quiet when she borrowed money. She never repaid. I stayed quiet when she failed again and again and again. But when I got excluded from a family dinner because of her fragile feelings," I smiled, a small cold thing. "That was the last time." He stood there, shivering slightly, the snow collecting on his coat. His voice dropped lower, almost pleading now. "We have no money, Claire. We've sold nearly everything valuable. I called the heating company, but we can't afford the upfront cost. Your mom has a fever. We can't take much more of this." The cold seeped through the crack in the door, but I didn't move. I didn't step back. I didn't offer warmth. "You told me I should stay back to keep the peace for Lila," I said evenly. "So I stayed back, exactly like you asked. As for peace," I let the words linger, cutting deeper than any knife I've found mine. Richard gripped the edge of his hood, his jaw tightening. "You're punishing the whole family over one sentence," said in frustration. He demanded. I opened the door a little wider, not to invite him in, but to let him see the glow of my small kitchen, the neatly folded blanket on my sofa, the quiet hum of my heater. A life built carefully, stubbornly without them. "It's not punishment," I said, my voice low and calm. "It's just letting you feel the cost of pushing someone aside when you no longer need them." He stared at me, half angry, half something I couldn't name. Maybe realization, maybe regret, maybe just cold. Then wordlessly, he turned and walked away. His footsteps crunching through the thick snow, his figure shrinking with each step. I closed the door behind him, the sound of the lock clicking into place clean and firm. Outside, the snow kept falling, muffling the world in white. Inside, I poured another cup of coffee, and for the first time in years, my hands didn't tremble. I didn't tremble at all. The week after Thanksgiving, my phone rang mid-afternoon. It was Haley, my cousin from southern Minnesota, one of the few relatives who had never asked for anything but my time. Someone who had seen Lila's theatrics for what they were and chose her distance wisely. Her voice came through the speaker loud and clear, a background of howling wind crashing against her window. "I just talked to Aunt Martha," she said, skipping any polite formalities. "Things at Willow Creek are worse than I thought." I set my cup of ginger tea down carefully on the dining table, my eyes following the fog as it traced ghostly fingers across the window pane. I murmured, waiting. Lila moved out. Haley continued, a note of grim amusement in her tone. "Her boyfriend dumped her. She crashed with a friend for a few nights, but that didn't last long. Now she's sleeping on some acquaintance's couch in Fort Collins. I wasn't surprised. Lila had always been a gravitational force, sucking everyone's attention, affection, and patience into her orbit until there was nothing left. And now finally the pull had weakened. The affection she took for granted had scattered like dry leaves in the winter wind. "What about my parents?" I asked, my voice calm, detached, like I was reading about strangers in the newspaper. Haley sighed. "Aunt Susan's staying in one of those motels off Interstate 25, real cheap place. The kind people rent by the week because they can't afford better. Heard she's got a mild case of pneumonia." I tightened my grip around the teacup, the image of my mother, once proud, once so careful about appearances, now huddling in a paper-thin motel room, hit me in a place I hadn't visited in months. "And Richard?" I asked. Haley hesitated, then sighed again. "He sold Grandpa's old watch collection. You know, the one he always bragged about, the one he swore would stay in the family forever." I closed my eyes briefly. I could still see the glass cabinet in the living room, the watches lined up like soldiers, each one representing something built before everything fell apart, now scattered, sold off to strangers for heating oil that would barely last a week. "You okay, Claire?" Haley asked, sensing my long silence. "I'm okay," I replied, steady as stone, just sad about how it all ended. "I'm not," Haley said, voice firmer. "I think you did the right thing. If people only come to you when they need something that's not love, that's survival at your expense." We chatted a little longer. Small things, easy things. When we hung up, I sat in the stillness, the phone dark and heavy in my hand. Not happy, not angry, just the cold clarity of someone who had finally stopped moving for people who never once moved for her. In the days that followed, I slipped back into my old rhythm, like slipping into a coat that finally fit. Early mornings with hot coffee and the quiet hum of the heater. Long shifts at the distribution center from 7 to 3. Afternoons wandering the local market, picking out fresh produce or pastries baked just that morning. Evenings spent curled in a blanket, lost in old jazz records, a novel cracked open across my lap. Sometimes I called Haley, laughing over ridiculous memes, over stories from her job at the small town library. Sometimes we talked about anything but family, because there was nothing left to say. Other than that silence. No messages from Lila, no calls from Richard, no half-hearted apologies from Susan. The old house at 105 Willow Creek Drive, the one where I had built forts under the dining table and failed my first attempt at baking cookies, was listed for sale on a local real estate site. Haley sent me the link. I didn't click it. I didn't need to see the empty, broken shell of a place I had already left, long before the doors were boarded up. Sometimes in dreams, I found myself standing in that kitchen again, the oven cold, the windows frosted over, the air so still, so empty, it ached. In the dream, I didn't cry. I just looked around one last time, memorized the silence, and quietly closed the door behind me. One night in early December, my phone lit up again, Haley's name on the screen. Her voice rang out between bursts of laughter and exasperation. "Claire, you won't believe this," she said. "Lila's gone viral." I raised an eyebrow, sinking deeper into my armchair. Viral for what? She posted some sob story video, crying on camera, saying you abandoned your poor, helpless family in the middle of a crisis, talking about how you froze them out while you lived selfishly. I snorted softly, unamused. Of course she did. "Not a word," Haley added, "about the $8,000 you paid to keep them warm for 2 winters. Not a word about them cutting you out of Thanksgiving." I leaned my head against the back of the chair, smiling without humor. "Let her talk. People will believe whatever makes the prettiest tragedy." Haley laughed loud and warm. "I love this version of you. Solid, unshakable, honestly inspiring." After the call, I made myself a cup of hot cocoa, sat by the window, and watched the snow fall slowly under the amber glow of the street lamp. The world outside was still cold, still harsh, still indifferent. But inside this small apartment, inside my own skin, I had finally found something that had eluded me for years: warmth. Not from other people, not from validation, but from simple things, from clear boundaries, from knowing that peace isn't something others grant you. It's something you claim when you finally stop asking permission. That afternoon, the snow grew thick and heavy, covering the tiny balcony, where I kept a dried pot of lavender, dead stems poking defiantly through the frost. I watched the flakes stack higher, layer after layer, a soft, relentless erasure, and I knew this time I wouldn't be the one buried underneath. The city was silent in the -4-degree cold. Even the wind seemed to move slower, dragging itself over rooftops and abandoned streets. No one ventured out unless absolutely necessary. Boulder had frozen into a ghost town under the heavy bruised sky. I was folding a freshly washed wool scarf, the faint smell of detergent clinging to the fabric, when the doorbell rang. At first I thought it was a delivery, but then came a second knock, steady, hesitant. That made me pause. I walked to the door, my heart unnaturally still, and peered through the peephole. "It was Susan, my mother." Bundled in a puffy coat so large it nearly swallowed her frame, a wool scarf wound tightly around her neck, layers of snow piling on her hat and shoulders, her shoes buried deep in a drift. She looked smaller than I remembered, older, weathered, and unfamiliar, as if time had finally demanded payment for all those years. She ignored it. I hesitated for a few seconds, then cracked the door open, leaving a narrow sliver between us. "Claire," she said softly, her voice trembling, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, something brittle and raw. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced," she began, but I didn't know how much longer I could wait. I leaned against the doorframe, my hand resting lightly on the knob, keeping my distance. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice neutral. "Why now, in this weather?" "I took the bus," she said, inhaling sharply before coughing into her scarf. "Walked the rest of the way. Took nearly an hour, but I thought maybe you'd hear me out this time." I didn't move, didn't offer to bring her inside. Just waited. "I've been thinking a lot," she continued, tightening her grip on the old handbag hanging from her shoulder. Her eyes dropped to the wet tiles at her feet, where the snow was beginning to melt into shallow puddles. "About Thanksgiving, about all the winters before." Her voice cracked slightly, and for the first time in years, I saw her without the usual mask of control and justification, no perfect reasoning, no polished defense. Just a woman standing in the cold, trying to find her way back from a road she chose long before I stopped walking behind her. "I realized I was wrong," she whispered. "Not just for what I said that day, but for all the years I let you carry everything and treated it like it was expected." I tilted my head slightly, studying her. The apology was real, but it arrived late after the warmth had long frozen over. "Lila regrets it too," she said, her voice smaller now. "She says things never should have gotten this far. She says you don't owe anyone anything." A dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. "Too late, Mom," I said quietly. "Everyone says I don't owe them anything now after I stopped paying, after everything collapsed." I kept my gaze locked on hers. Do I suddenly become someone worth appreciating now that I'm no longer convenient? "No," she said quickly, shaking her head, her voice breaking. "That's not it. I just want you to know I understand now. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't stand by you sooner." We stood there in the breathless cold, the air sharp against my skin, the years stretching out between us like a frozen river. Those apologies, if they had come years ago, might have softened me, might have opened a door I had long since boarded shut. But now the wounds no longer bled. They had hardened into scars, and scars don't feel. "You chose Lila," I said slowly, each word deliberate, precise as a scalpel. "When I needed a seat at the table, you told me to stay back because Lila was stressed, when the house was falling apart. I paid the bills, but Lila was the one who got comforted. When I started living for myself, you called it punishment." I paused, letting the silence stretch taut between us. "So what now?" I asked, my voice low. "You're here to ask me to carry it all again." Tears pooled in her eyes, slipping down her weathered cheeks. "No," she whispered. "I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know you matter. And even if you never forgive me, I accept that." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I opened the door a little wider, not to invite her inside, but to let her feel the warmth radiating from behind me. The light, the peace, the life I had built with my own hands, steady, strong, and utterly without them. A stark contrast to where she had come from. "I'm not angry anymore," I said honestly, and it was true. But I'm not the same person either. I'm not the last bolt holding the Dawson family together. I've stopped doing that, and I'm not going back. Susan tightened her grip on her bag, her hands trembling. She nodded once, her breath visible in the freezing air. "I understand," she said simply. I didn't close the door right away. We stood there, letting the winter wind weave its way between the silence. Then she turned and walked away, her figure growing smaller and smaller against the endless white. No more words, no more desperate hands, reaching for what had already been lost. I watched until she disappeared around the corner, swallowed by the snow. Then, with steady hands, I closed the door. The lock clicked into place clean, certain final. Inside, the lamp glowed warmly over my small living room. The space heater hummed softly in the background. The jazz track I'd paused earlier resumed, a soft saxophone filling the air like a quiet victory song. I returned to the sofa, pulled the blanket around my shoulders, and leaned back. And as the music played, one truth settled deep in my chest. For the first time in my life, I didn't need permission to be free. January passed in a soft white hush of snowfall. The city lay frozen under a bitter, unrelenting cold, and I continued living at the quiet, steady pace I'd chosen for myself. My small apartment stayed warm thanks to the space heater humming softly by the window, and the small rituals I crafted to fill my days. Reheating soup, toasting thick slices of bread, knitting scarves with yarn I bought from the secondhand craft store downtown. The rhythm was simple, predictable healing. There were no more messages from Susan. The last time she came was that day after Thanksgiving, standing in the snow, holding years of regret she couldn't erase. Since then, nothing. No blame, no begging, not even the usual mass-sent New Year greetings she used to forward without thinking. And strangely, I didn't feel sad. I felt relieved. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean, fresh air after a storm so long and brutal, I'd forgotten what breathing felt like. Haley still called, sometimes her voice a tether to the outside world, though she never pushed or pried. "I saw Lila post on a community forum," Haley said during our most recent call, her tone dripping with amused disbelief. She said she lost her job, looking for temporary housing and blaming family fractures for her situation, same old deflecting. I switched my phone to speaker and kept chopping onions in the kitchen. The comforting aroma of sautéing butter and sharp onion filling the room, overpowering whatever sympathy her words might have stirred once. "Uncle Paul's trying to sell his old SUV." Haley added, the humor fading slightly, trying to scrape together enough to cover overdue bills. "And Aunt Martha, she moved in with a cousin out in Des Moines, says she needs time to rethink how she raised her kids." Haley gave a short, bitter laugh. "A little late, huh?" "Yeah," I said quietly, sliding the chopped onions into a pan. But maybe better late than never. And maybe not. Some mistakes you can't undo with distance and reflection. Some bridges you can't rebuild after you've burned every supporting beam. As the days stretched forward, I realized something else. The things that once twisted painfully inside me, anger, grief, betrayal, had dulled into something simpler understanding. Not everyone changes. Not everyone is worth hoping they will, and not everything broken is meant to be fixed. Some cracks are meant to stay cracks, like fractures on frozen lakes. Dangerous to step back onto, foolish to pretend solid ground still exists. I no longer thought about Lila every night. No longer scrolled social media hunting for mentions or apologies that would never come. I no longer checked my email half expecting a desperate plea or a thinly veiled guilt trip. I just lived, truly, quietly, fully, every morning. When I woke in this modest apartment, this warm, honest space, I remembered that this life was something I chose, something I built for myself, not something someone else assigned to me based on their needs. At the end of January, I stopped by the used bookstore down the block. The old shopkeeper greeted me with a grin as he wiped down the counter. Haven't seen you in a while, he said cheerfully. Braving the cold, huh? I smiled a small but genuine thing and picked out a worn paperback about women who had left their families behind to start new lives. It felt fitting. When I got home, I placed the book on the table, set a kettle to boil, and settled in by the fireplace. The fire glowed bright, casting warm flickers of orange against the exposed brick wall. I pulled the wool blanket tighter around my shoulders and stared into the flames. Steady, quiet, persistent. A reflection of the life I was building. Somewhere beyond these thick apartment walls, I imagined the old house at Willow Creek still standing. Cold empty, maybe patched together with borrowed space heaters. Maybe Lila filling out aid applications with the same entitled desperation she had always worn like perfume. Maybe Susan curled under 3 threadbare blankets, thinking about the dinners where I was there. Silent, overlooked, keeping everything running behind the scenes. But I no longer belonged to that back then. The fire crackled, agreeing with the unspoken truth. I reached for my tea, the steam curling up around my face, softening the edges of the memory, not to erase it, but to finally set it down. Winter would last, snow would fall, the cold would come and come again. But this time I would not be the one shivering, not the one left knocking on closed doors. I had chosen peace and I didn't regret it. Not for a moment. From this story, my story, I learned a truth. I had spent years resisting. Not all blood ties are worth preserving. Some boundaries once crossed too many times must be redrawn in stone, not sand. I once believed that sacrifice was the purest form of love, that enduring silence and hurt meant devotion. But the truth is harsher and freer. Unconditional sacrifice only teaches others to devalue your worth. Now I live differently. I no longer seek validation from people who only loved me when it was convenient. I no longer audition for a seat at a table that treated me like an afterthought. I live for myself. And that is the freest thing I have ever done. Claire didn't choose hatred. She chose freedom. She didn't choose to keep carrying a family that only knew how to exploit her love. She chose a new path, one where her self-worth comes first. If you've ever sacrificed and been taken for granted, if you've ever felt betrayed by the ones who were supposed to love you, you are not alone. Share your story in the comments below. I read every message because every voice deserves to be heard. Comment 9 if you're also walking the journey of healing and reclaiming your life. And if today's story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue walking this path of awakening, growth, and strength together. Remember, you don't need your family's permission to live a life that honors you. You only need to believe in yourself. Thank you for being here today. See you in the next story.